First there was Wingspan, then Wyrmspan, and now you're telling me there's a Finspan? Finspan? Why? But also I need it. Stonemaier Games recently decided to break the internet and break everybody's brain by announcing the third and kind of final installment of Wingspan, which is not Wyrmspan, that's this one. This is Finspan. But if you already have one of these games, whether it's Wingspan or Wyrmspan or both, do you really need Finspan? I mean, is this one that you need in your collection? Let's kind of dive into my thoughts on this subject because I have lots of them. Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel today. My name is Carly and today we're going to be kind of taking a look and chatting about the newest title from Stonemaier Games, which is Finspan. When Stonemaier Games announced this a handful of weeks ago, I feel like everybody kind of freaked out a little bit. So many people kind of commenting and saying that, like, why did we need this? This shouldn't have even been made. And then a bunch of people on the other side saying, well, you're not saying anything about the 500 versions of Ticket to Ride or all the other games that come out with so many iterations. So there was kind of these like two groups of people, right, that were arguing kind of back and forth. But whether you like it or not, Finspan is here. And I was able to, Jamie was kind enough to send me over this kind of like early kind of review copy so I could play the game, kind of share my thoughts on it. Primarily why I kind of wanted to make this video was to kind of compare all of the games so far, right? Wingspan, Wyrmspan, and now Finspan. Because inherently there are differences between the three games. They all kind of rest on that kind of core mechanism, that core mechanic that is found in Wingspan, where you have a board, you're slowly building out, whether it's birds or dragons or fish, and you are kind of getting more and more. That kind of like engine building mechanism is kind of at the core of all three of these games. But there kind of are differences between the three, so what one is the right pick for you and for your game group? That's kind of at the heart of this video and kind of what we're going to be discussing today. So very briefly, before we dive into Finspan, we're actually going to kind of really very briefly kind of talk about Wingspan, just in case you are not familiar with this game. I'm sure, I mean, those of you who are familiar with Wingspan, I'm sure you could probably skip this section of the video. Wingspan is the first of this trilogy. It was the very first one that was released. Wingspan kind of like broke the gaming world. Like everybody, I mean, even like people who are not gamers know about this game. Like that's how popular it is. But in this game, you have this individual player board that opens up and you will actually be playing birds into your sanctuary here. You will have a set number of action cubes each round, and it is with those action cubes that you can do various actions on the board, whether it is play a bird into one of your rows, gaining food, laying eggs, or drawing bird cards. As you place birds onto your rows, you will slowly place more and more, kind of making these rows longer and longer. Why that is important is because let's pretend you place this bird here into your wetlands. What would happen now is next time you chose to draw a bird card, you would actually take your little action cube and place it on the first empty slot. Activate that, and then you work backwards, activating any birds that has a if activated tag on them. So if you had built this row all the way up to here, well, next time you go to draw bird cards, you will actually get two birds with the possibility of getting an egg or discarding an egg to get another one, and then again slowly working back, stopping on all those birds. This mechanism of having some sort of animal, playing it onto your engine board, right? Building it out, kind of getting stronger and stronger as the game goes on. That is found in all three of these games, in Wingspan, in Wyrmspan, and now in Finspan. Something that Wingspan offers that the other two don't, though, is kind of the way that resources are handled through this bird tower. Is it called a bird tower? I don't know. The game comes with this beautiful little like birdhouse, which you will actually have dice. Drop those dice into it, and during the game, whatever is showing on the dice, well, that is those are the resources that you can collect or gain throughout the game. So for example, if it was my turn and I chose to gain food, this is the only food that I could gain. I could either gain 2 berries, I could gain a wheat or a worm or a rat. So the resources in this game are slightly more tricky because it does have a little bit of that luck element to it in regards to the dice that are showing. Now there are birds that you can play into your engine that inherently inherently generate a rat for you. So every single time it's activated, you will gain a rat, and you know you have that available. But in regards to the dice tower, it is just pure luck. Something else that will be generating on your birds are these eggs. Birds lay eggs, right? And so for every single bird, they will be able to lay or potentially lay a certain number of eggs, which can be spent to sometimes fulfill cards needs, but primarily they kind of are worth points at the end of the game. The eggs in Wyrmspan are actually really similar to kind of how the eggs operate in Wingspan. In Finspan, they do have eggs as well, but they operate slightly differently, so we'll get into that in just a second. So that's essentially what Wingspan offers, is you're building out your bird sanctuary, again using your action cubes. Every single round there will be end of round scoring, or end of round scoring, and based on where you score, you will actually place one of your action cubes on this row here, which inherently it'll stay there for the rest of the game. So going into a future round, you will actually be one action short. So by the end of the or going into round 4, you actually have 3 less actions as the game goes on. This is also kind of found in Wyrmspan, but not found in Finspan at all, which we'll talk about that in a little bit later. That aspect of Wingspan is actually different than Wyrmspan and Finspan. This is the only game that kind of does this, where you're one action short every single round, so that kind of end game kind of ramps up a little bit. All right, so kind of hopefully that gives you a general idea of kind of what Wingspan is all about. Let's go ahead and dive into Wyrmspan. Wyrmspan has that same kind of mechanic of Wingspan, except there's a little bit more going on. This is the map for Wyrmspan, and you can tell it kind of has that same look of the Wingspan map. You're going to essentially kind of be doing those same things, but just in a different way. In Wyrmspan, you're actually going to be playing dragons into these 3 cave systems. The opening entrance to the caves are already kind of excavated or dug out, so you can just inherently fill a dragon in those slots. But every single slot after that one, you actually have to excavate it first. So that's the first action that you can do, is excavate. When you excavate, you will pay a coin, which coins are essentially like the action cubes in Wingspan, but you will pay a coin, and then you will be able to actually dig out, which basically means place kind of a small little excavated cave icon on that location. All of these cave cards have like instant uses or instant abilities, so when you play them, you actually get the abilities that are under them. Once that cave system is in place, then that's when you can actually entice your dragon. This is kind of getting hard to hold, but every single dragon has a cost, so if you're able to pay that cost, then that's when you can entice the dragon to now fill that empty cave slot. Filling out your cave systems is super important, because if you remember in Wingspan, when you take your action cube, if you have a really big row filled out, then you can basically do more and more with that particular action. This acts the same way, but you actually will be traveling through your caves instead of working backwards. And your little traveler, when you take this action, this is the explore action, what you can use your little traveler, and you will go through your cave systems as far as you possibly can until you reach one of these stop icons. Then that's what triggers you to return your little explorer back to the base camp here. So you have excavate, entice, which is bringing your dragons into your caves, exploring, which we just talked about. When you do explore, either your first, second, or third time, there is a cost, an inherent cost that's associated with exploring. So it gets more and more expensive the more that you explore. So you really want to make it worth it every time you explore. And again, kind of similar to the birds, these dragons, lots of these dragons have little abilities. So when you do go through and activate them, they will generate some sort of resource for you. Some of them generate endgame points, some of them generate like when played. There's lots of different ways that the dragons, very similar to the birds in Wingspan and similar to the fish in Finspan, generate things for you in your engine. One of the big differences between Wyrmspan and the other 2 games is this Dragon Guild board. Throughout the game, you might trigger this symbol up here on the board. When that does, you will have a little icon that's placed on this board, and you will be going in circles around and around and around, and every single time you stop somewhere, you will generate whatever is shown. So this kind of helps generate stuff for you, but then you also will have these goals. There's lots of different goals that that come with the game, and whenever you are move on to this top or bottom location, you can actually put one of your cubes claiming this ability. Sorry, not ability, claiming end game points, just ways to score more points at the end of the game. And just to be clear, you still have your end of round stuff that you're trying to score points for. So just kind of think of this as like a whole other way to get points from this game. These are obviously just kind of very general explanations of how these games play, but I hope that kind of shows the differences between at least Wingspan and Wyrmspan so far. Lots of people refer to Wyrmspan as like a more gamery version of Wingspan, which I definitely agree with. There is more you have to think about, there is more going on. Even just simply having to excavate an area before your dragon can go in, right? Versus Wingspan, where you can place a bird. If you can pay for it, you can place. But this adds it kind of just feels like Wingspan, but with an extra level thrown on top of it. So if this is the more gamery version of Wingspan, then what is Finspan? The way that Finspan has been described is it's kind of like a more accessible version, an easier, kind of more streamlined version of Wingspan. So let's dive into it. Right off the bat, when I opened up this box, the very first thing I noticed was, like, for example, in Wingspan and in Wyrmspan, my box is like packed to the brim. It's really like, it's hard to kind of shove everything in there. There's a lot going on. This is literally all that's in this game. You have your player boards, you have this nice little holder, and that's it. I mean, I have a lot of extra room in here, which I was shocked because it's like the complete opposite of the other two. So right off the bat, there is less components than the other game, which is nice. So I'm gonna kind of pull out the player board. A little nitpick I have with this game. I have a couple nitpicks, so I'll point those out as I kind of show off stuff. And really my nitpicks just kind of comes down with consistency, because this is meant to be like a trio of games. It's meant to be kind of like a series. Wingspan, Wyrmspan, now Finspan. So there's just stuff that I wish would have been more consistent. This is the very first thing I noticed. So in Wingspan and in Wyrmspan, the art is actually on the outside of the player boards, and then you open it up and you see the pretty kind of what you're actually going to be dealing with. It's the opposite in this game. So the art is on the back, which I just wish this would have been on the outside of the board, and then you open it and then you have your actual board. Just in terms of consistency, because Wingspan and Wyrmspan are both the opposite, so it felt weird. A weird move for them to do it this way. But in Finspan, what you're going to be doing is you will, again, same layout, right? But this time you're vertical, because you're going to be diving into the ocean. Right off the bat, in case you can't already tell, you actually begin the game with some fish already placed in your ocean. That is completely different from Wyrmspan and Wingspan. Sorry, Beckham woke up, so he's going to be joining us for the rest of this video. Another thing that's really different about this game is you will actually start the game with these starter cards. In Wingspan and also in Wyrmspan, I believe, it's been a while since I played Wyrmspan, but you are randomly dealt cards, and also you have some resources. Oh, you okay? You're just randomly dealt cards and you have resources, and then you can choose at the beginning of the game what cards to discard and what cards to hold on to. But for every card you hold on to, you have to discard one of your starting resources. That's like a really, really big important moment of the game right off the bat, and this just kind of eliminates that. You basically just get a couple starting cards, then you grab a couple regular cards, and that's your starting hand. That's just like what you start the game with. You will also grab your little divers of your color here. I believe you have 5. Is it 5 of your color? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's 6 of your color. These divers are also inherently different than the other two games, because in the other two games, the amount of actions that you have in every single round can kind of fluctuate or change. In this game, you have 6 divers. You will have those 6 divers throughout the entire game. That will never change. On your turn, there's really 2 things you can do. You can either play a fish card into anywhere on your board. You don't have to build out like you have to do in the other ones. You can play a fish card anywhere, as long as it matches the particular zone that it has to be with. Or you can choose to dive into one of your sections on your board. There are 3 sections. There's this blue section, purple section, and then green section. And when you dive, you actually will take your little diver and you will dive all the way to the bottom, even if it's not built out. This is another big difference between the other games, because in Wingspan and Wyrmspan, you will only go a certain distance before you inevitably have to stop and go back. But this game, right from the beginning, you can dive and you will activate all of these little brown spots. Obviously, the more you build out, the more brown spots or activations that you will actually be able to do on that dive action. But it is nice that at the beginning of the game, you can automatically kind of generate more resources than the other games. These fish card operate essentially the same way that the other games do. Some of these have a when played ability. Some of them have a when activated ability. Some of them have at game end ability. So there's really nothing inherently different. The only thing that you just kind of have to keep in mind is what zone you are able to place your animals in. Because there are 3 zones. You have the daylight zone, which is the largest. You have the, what is it? This middle zone. I forgot what it's called, like the middle area. And then you have, or is it twilight? The twilight zone. And then you have the midnight zone, which is the bottom of the board. In Wingspan and in Wyrmspan, there is like that egg element, right? Where you're kind of producing or making eggs. Wyrmspan takes that same kind of idea, but actually alters it and changes it. And honestly, I think they change it for the better. I like the way that this game does eggs versus the other games. Now, don't get me wrong. I love like the wooden or resin eggs that you might have in the other games. I think those are amazing and I love them. But I just think that they're just more interesting in this game. And this is why. A big portion of this game is actually making eggs. Okay, so you're going to be making eggs and you're going to be putting them on your fishes. On these 3 columns of what you can do with your diver is this first column is all about getting cards. The second column is all about getting eggs. And then this third column is about hatching eggs. When you are making eggs, you will be able to place 1 egg on every fish. Every single fish can hold 1 egg across the board. When you are hatching eggs, though, that's kind of a really big part of the game, which is completely different from Wingspan and Wyrmspan. You will take your eggs that you've produced on the board, flip them over to their little young guppy phase. There are many instances and times throughout the game where you can activate an ability that actually allows you to move these fish independent from the other fish that you have placed onto these slots. You can move your guppies up and around, and whenever you happen to move 3 together on the same location, they actually turn into a little school of guppies. And why this is important is because at the end of the game, every egg is inherently worth 1 point. Every guppy is inherently worth 1 point, but then every group of fish is actually worth 6 points at the end of the game. These are also important because they have to do with your or your end of round scoring, which is the same again as Wingspan versus Wyrmspan, but it doesn't have Wyrmspan's kind of like extra level of scoring you have to do. It's basically you have just your basic end of round scoring, kind of like in Wingspan. So you have your ocean board, you're slowly kind of building out. Again, you can build anywhere on this board you want to, anywhere you want to. Whenever you dive, you go all the way down to the bottom. You never lose your workers, right? So you will always have those 6 workers throughout the entire game, or 6 actions for every single round. You don't have any resources. Really, the only resources that you use to attract fish into your ecosystem is by spending other cards. And when you spend those cards, it actually just goes to a personal discard pile, which many abilities give you, or many fish give you the ability to actually reclaim a card from your personal discard pile. So just because you might use it doesn't mean it's gone forever. You actually can pull it back as well. Sometimes some cards do require an egg. Okay, it'll require an egg or a guppy, or some fish like the great white. I don't know where the great white is, but pretend this is the great white. Will actually eat that fish. So kind of coming back to Finspan kind of claiming it's an easier version of Wingspan. I don't know if it's necessarily quote unquote easier, because honestly Wingspan is a pretty easy game. It's pretty simple, it's pretty straightforward, but Finspan does seem like a more streamlined version of Wingspan. I think the thinkiness level is still the same because you're still kind of like thinking ahead a little bit. You still are trying to think through those chaining actions, right? If I place this here, then that could mean this, which then could trigger this, which I love in Wingspan. This still definitely has that. So it still has that level of thinkiness, but it's just more streamlined in the sense that there's not the kind of fiddliness that you have to worry about. You don't have any sort of resource that you're trying to juggle on top of placing your cards. That's just completely cut out. That's gone. Again, you can place anywhere on your board, right? You can place anywhere. Done. When you are diving, you go all the way to the bottom. It takes a lot about the core gameplay of Wingspan, but just makes it easier to dive into. It's like if somebody has never played Wingspan before, this is the game that I would introduce. This is the game that I would use to introduce them to this system. I mean, inherently, so many people are comparing this to Wingspan, right? And they're saying, why, if we have Wingspan, if we have Wyrmspan, why do we need Finspan? So let's kind of touch on that, because what I just mentioned is, for me, the reason why I like having Finspan in my collection and why I think this is a good one to have, because I personally love Wingspan. Honestly, kind of where my thoughts are, Wingspan is still my favorite. Most gamers, like I want to be very clear, most gamers do not agree with me. Most people prefer Wyrmspan to Wingspan. I'm kind of the odd one out where I like the dice tower. I like trying to figure out my turn around the randomized dice, or try to make my actions more efficient so I don't even need to worry about the bird feeder. I just really like Wingspan. It's been my favorite. It's on my top 100 games of all time. I love it. I really like Wyrmspan too. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I like how it is kind of more crunchy. I just find myself kind of drawn to Wingspan more personally. Having said that, I was really skeptical kind of coming into Finspan, because I was kind of like, is it really going to change that much? Like, Wingspan is pretty simple. Why would I need a even more simple version of Wingspan? For me, though, this does just kind of fit that niche of wanting to introduce somebody, especially like a non-gamer, to Wingspan. Because I know, like, my mom, every single time we sit down to play Wingspan, she really wants to play it, but it takes her like a full game to kind of like remember what to do, kind of remember her turns. I have to sit and walk her through every single turn. This game is what I would introduce people to. This is because it just streamlines so much. So for me, I actually am really happy to have this in my collection, and I do think that there is a need for this game. If you are like a really big heavy gamer who has a dedicated game group, and you don't really introduce Wingspan to new or younger players at all, I don't really necessarily know if you need this. If the theme doesn't speak to you, then maybe this isn't one that would kind of help enhance your collection. For me personally, I play a lot of games with people who would be considered non-gamers or younger gamers. Like, I think Addie could easily dive into this game and play this much easier than Wingspan. We have yet to play it with her yet. I'll circle back around when we actually do. But I think the theme is fun. I think it is interesting how you are dealing with the vertical board instead of the horizontal. Something I will mention is it does kind of make the table space funky, because, like, for example, this table, if I were to place this on the table, like, there's not enough space on my current table for two players to have their boards directly in front of them. So you kind of have to like layer out your boards, and it just makes the game, I don't know, it just looks kind of funky and a little bit different. So I don't like that aspect of it, but I love like the thematics of like diving into your ocean and playing out the cards. So kind of rounding out this video here, I really liked Finspan. For me personally, I am really happy to have this one, because this is the game that if we have people around the table who've never played Wingspan before, this is so much easier to teach, because in Wingspan you do have those minor, nope, your cube actually goes to this one, and then you work backwards, and then you have to do this, and oh, you have to place your cube here to then gain an egg here. It's just way more streamlined. It's way more simple. This is the one that I would start with. And then if they enjoyed it, then that's when I would bring out Wyrmspan or Wingspan, and then work your way up to Wyrmspan, right? I like actually how they did this. I like how they took that core mechanism. They really did give us a game that's slightly more complicated with Wyrmspan, and now Finspan, which is a slightly simpler, kind of easier to dive into version of Wingspan. At the end of the day, Wingspan is still my favorite. Like, I give Wingspan a 9 out of 10. I give it higher with some of the expansions actually. Finspan, I mean, I really like this one too. I'm going to be giving Finspan an 8.5 out of 10. I really enjoyed this one. And I really do think that if you kind of hit with you kind of are in the same boat as I am, as I don't really have a super dedicated game group. I just kind of play games as I'm able to, right? As I see opportunities, as we have families over for dinner, or a random friend comes into town, that's kind of when I'm able to game. And so I'm happy that I can have this to help introduce the Wingspan world, just kind of have a more approachable way to introduce Wingspan to more players. Thank you so much for watching this kind of like comparison video / review. I really hope this video kind of gives you the information you might have been looking for or needed in regards to these 3 games and which ones would fit for your collection. Maybe Wingspan, maybe Wyrmspan, maybe Finspan, maybe all of them. No matter what one kind of like fits your game style more, I really do think these are 3 fantastic games, great titles. You really can't go wrong with any of them. Thank you so much for watching this video today. If you enjoyed this video and you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, it means so much if you could do that. It really helps support me in everything that we're doing over here. But until next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you later. Oh yeah, and I totally forgot to mention this, but when are we gonna come out with like transparent cards for this game? I need them so bad. You have no idea. I need transparent cards so it actually looks like you're putting fish in your ocean without the white border. Like, please, please, Jamie, please. I want transparent cards for all of these games. I want dragons, I want my birds, and now my fish. I need them so bad. Please, please.